The Galactic Federation Pilot Assessment Center resembled what would happen if an Apple store mated with an air traffic control tower and their offspring developed a superiority complex. Everything gleamed with that distinctive alien sheen that somehow made Earth technology look like it was assembled by cave people with rocks for tools. My name is Jack Harper, and I was the 7th human ever to set foot in this facility. According to the briefing packet I'd received, I was also the reason why I would be the last human permitted to take the Federation's flight simulator test without extensive modifications to the protocol. Candidate Harper, please follow me. The voice belonged to my assessor, Commander Velox, a Rigelian with skin the color of a bruised plum and 8 finger-like appendages on each hand. His species was known for their computational abilities and rigid adherence to protocol, which made his visible discomfort at my presence all the more amusing. Nervous, Commander? I asked, flashing what I hoped was a reassuring smile as we walked down a sterile corridor. Velox's eye membranes fluttered rapidly, the Rigelian equivalent of a grimace. I have reviewed the files of previous human assessment attempts. Your species has a creative approach to problem solving that has proven challenging for our systems. That was diplomatic. Humans had only joined the Federation 3 years ago, but we'd already developed quite the reputation. The diplomatic corps called it innovative thinking. Military commanders called it tactical unpredictability. Engineers usually went with why would you even try that? Whatever you called it, it made the more established species uncomfortable. I promised to follow all protocols, I said in my most sincere voice. The voice that once convinced my flight instructor I definitely hadn't intentionally inverted our training craft just to see if I could write my name in the clouds while upside down. Velox's secondary breathing holes whistled slightly. Yes, that is precisely what Candidate Chen said before she reconfigured our previous simulator. I suppressed a snort. Sarah Chen was a legend among human pilots. Nobody knew exactly what she'd done in her assessment, but the diplomatic fallout had required intervention at the ambassadorial level. You have my word as a representative of Earth, I added, which wasn't technically a promise of good behavior. More like an acknowledgement that whatever happened next would indeed be representative of how humans operate. As we approached the simulation chamber, I noticed a small gathering of Federation officials behind a transparent barrier. They weren't even pretending not to stare at me. One of them, a gaseous entity contained in an environment suit, actually backed away when I waved. Is that normal? I asked, pointing at the observers. Seems like a lot of high-ranking officials for a routine assessment. Your assessment has been designated as a special interest case, Velox replied, his voice modulator struggling to maintain its professional tone. After the incidents with the previous human candidates, several departments have taken an interest in the proceedings. They're expecting a show, I translated. They are expecting a containable incident, Velox corrected. I am hoping to disappoint them. Please, Candidate Harper, remember that this facility represents a significant investment of Federation resources. As the assessment chamber doors parted with a pneumatic hiss, I wondered what exactly the previous 6 humans had done to warrant such concern. And more importantly, if I could top it. The briefing room resembled a theater in the round, with tiered seating circling a holographic projection system that currently displayed what looked like the bastard child of an F-22 Raptor and a bioluminescent jellyfish. Scattered throughout the seats were about a dozen other candidates, each representing a different species of the Federation. I was the only human. Please take your seat, Candidate Harper. Velox directed me to an empty spot between what appeared to be a sentient crystal formation and something that looked like a 6-legged sloth with cybernetic enhancements. The crystal being chimed softly as I sat down, which my translator rendered as, "Is it true humans navigate by creating explosions behind your vessels?" "Only on Tuesdays," I replied with a straight face. The crystal vibrated in what I hoped was laughter and not terror. A tall insectoid Federation officer stepped into the center of the room, mandibles clicking as the universal translator kicked in. "Welcome, candidates, to the Federation Flight Aptitude Assessment. I am Major Xit, your head examiner." He paused, compound eyes swiveling deliberately in my direction. "Today's assessment will follow standard protocols, with certain contingency measures in place." The sloth-like creature beside me leaned over, moving with deliberate slowness. They installed emergency cutoffs after the 3rd human candidate. Something about relativistic concerns. Its translator had a peculiar lisp. "I'm Lorleth, by the way." "Jack," I replied, wondering what the hell a human pilot had done to raise relativistic concerns. Major Xitka's holographic display shifted to show a complex scoring matrix. "The simulation will test your reflexes, decision-making, spatial awareness, and adherence to Federation flight protocols. Your performance will be evaluated across 17 categories with 43 subcategories." The display shifted again, showing a sleek simulator pod. Unlike the bulky VR setups we used on Earth, The Federation simulator was a full neural interface that created a perfect sensory experience. The simulator will present increasingly difficult scenarios based on real navigational challenges encountered in Federation space. Sit continued. You will be evaluated not only on survival but on efficiency, resource management, and adherence to Federation flight doctrine. I raised my hand, earning a withering look from Velox. Yes, Candidate Harper. Sitka's mandibles clicked rapidly, the insectoid equivalent of a sigh. Just to clarify, sir, the simulator can't actually harm us, right? Physically, I mean. The room went unnervingly quiet. Several candidates turned to stare at me. The neural safeguards prevent any permanent psychological damage, Sitka replied carefully, though we did have to recalibrate certain pain thresholds after the incident with your predecessor. The one who tried to do a barrel roll through an artificial quantum singularity, chirped a bird-like candidate from across the room. That was the fifth human, corrected Lorleth. The fourth one attempted to use a gas giant's atmosphere as a slingshot and broke the physics engine. Sitka's antennae twitched irritably. These incidents are precisely why human candidates now receive special briefings. Candidate Harper, please note that while creative problem-solving is valued in actual field operations, this assessment is designed to evaluate your ability to follow established protocols. I nodded solemnly, though mentally I was already wondering what would happen if you tried to navigate a wormhole backwards. Not that I would attempt such a thing, of course. Probably. Each candidate will have one attempt at the simulator, Sit continued. Your results will determine your eligibility for various fleet positions. He paused again, looking directly at me. Some species have natural adaptations that provide advantages in certain scenarios. The scoring algorithm accounts for these biological differences. Translation: they'd adjusted the scoring system after humans kept breaking their simulator in ways they hadn't thought possible. Candidates will proceed in order of registration. Candidate Harper. Another pointed look. You have been scheduled last to allow for technical adjustments between sessions. As the briefing continued with tedious details about scoring metrics and emergency procedures, several of which seemed to have been added specifically because of humans, I couldn't help but feel a mix of pride and amusement. Humanity had only been part of the Federation for 3 years, yet we'd already forced them to rewrite their rulebooks multiple times. The crystal being beside me chimed again. Is it accurate that humans sometimes navigate by what you call gut feeling rather than sensor data? Sometimes, I admitted. We call it intuition. Fascinating. It resonated. My species makes navigational decisions based on quantum probability fields. The idea of biological intuition is difficult to process. That's probably why we keep surprising you all, I replied with a grin. The Federation had expected logical protocol following new members. Instead, they got humans, creatures who sometimes chose to do things simply to see what would happen. And today, they were going to get one more demonstration of why that made us simultaneously the Federation's biggest headache and its secret weapon. The waiting area for candidates resembled an upscale dentist's office designed by someone who'd never actually met a humanoid. The chairs were almost comfortable, except they seemed optimized for beings with very different anatomical arrangements. I perched awkwardly on what I hoped was the seat and not some alien armrest, watching as candidates were called one by one. Harper, Earth human. A voice like grinding stones called out. I looked up to see a being that resembled a sentient boulder with glowing veins of what might have been magma. You are the one who pilots explosion ships. Yes, that's one way to describe our propulsion systems, I replied, the boulder being rumbled in what might have been laughter. I am Grecht of the Petrosians. We have heard many stories about humans in space. He settled beside me with a concerning creak from the furniture. Is it true your kind once flew between planets using only chemical combustion? Still do, sometimes, I admitted. Though we've adopted Federation tech for interstellar travel, this prompted a small gathering of curious aliens. Lorlath, the sloth-like creature from the briefing, had finally made his way over. Behind him hovered an entity that seemed to be made entirely of colored gas contained within a translucent membrane. Heard a human once crashed the simulator by attempting to use a black hole's event horizon as a shortcut, bubbled the gas entity. Called it a gravity assist when questioned. Is this typical human navigation strategy? That's excessive, I said diplomatically. Though we do sometimes use gravitational fields to conserve fuel by risking total molecular disintegration, chimed in the crystal being, vibrating in what I was now fairly certain was their equivalent of laughter. Fascinating risk assessment algorithms your species employs. A Federation technician approached our group, clearly uncomfortable with the impromptu human Kunda session. Candidate Harper, you're required for pre-simulation preparation. I followed the technician into a small room filled with equipment that looked like it belonged in a medical facility rather than a flight school. A hovering drone scanned me from head to toe. "This is just a baseline neural mapping," explained the technician, a humanoid with pale blue skin and silver freckles that shifted position as she spoke. "I'm Technician Lyra. I'll be monitoring your physiological responses during the simulation. Should I be concerned about that?" I asked as electrodes were attached to my temples. Lyra's freckles swirled into a pattern I couldn't interpret. "Let's just say we've had to develop specific monitoring protocols for human candidates. Your species experiences unusual neurochemical responses to stress and risk." "You mean adrenaline?" "Among other things," she muttered, checking readings on a holographic display. "Most Federation species respond to danger by enhancing logical processing and survival-based decision-making. Humans appear to enter a state that combines heightened sensory processing with what our xenobiologists can only describe as recreational excitement." I couldn't help but grin. "We call it a rush." "Yes, well, that rush has led one of your predecessors to attempt what they called a Tokyo drift through an asteroid field." Lyra shook her head, freckles forming concentric circles. "The simulator wasn't programmed to handle that kind of improvisation." After the neural mapping, Lyra guided me to a small chamber containing what looked like a pilot's seat surrounded by a sphere of translucent material. "This is the simulator interface," she explained. "Unlike your Earth systems that use visual and audio feeds, the Federation simulator creates a direct neural connection, allowing you to experience a perfect sensory recreation of actual flight conditions. So it's like VR but better," I summarized. "It's nothing like—" Lyra stopped herself with visible effort. "Yes, VR but better. The control interface will adapt to match your mental model of piloting. Think of the controls you're most familiar with, and the system will configure accordingly. Any rules I should know about? Things previous humans got in trouble for?" Lyra's freckles formed what appeared to be exclamation marks. "The list of prohibited actions is quite extensive now, but primarily, no attempting to exceed light speed without proper warp field initiation, no intentional collisions with celestial bodies to see what happens, no attempts to surf solar flares, and absolutely no reprogramming of simulation parameters through the neural interface." "Wait, someone managed to hack the simulator, with their mind." "Your fifth candidate somehow convinced the system she had administrator privileges," Lyra said with a hint of reluctant admiration. "We still don't fully understand how." As I settled into the simulator seat, Lyra made final adjustments to the neural interface. "Remember, Candidate Harper, this assessment is about demonstrating your ability to follow Federation protocols, not your creativity in circumventing them." "Crystal clear," I replied, already wondering if the simulator could model what would happen if you ignited drive exhaust inside a nebula. "Purely as a theoretical exercise, of course." Lyra gave me a look that suggested she knew exactly what I was thinking. "The assessment will begin momentarily. Good luck, Candidate Harper, and please, try to keep the simulation intact this time." As the interface sphere closed around me, I couldn't help but feel I was about to uphold a proud human tradition of baffling alien expectations. After all, what's the point of a simulator if not to test its limits? The neural interface activated with a pleasant tingle that spread from my temples down my spine. The world around me dissolved, replaced by the interior of a Federation scout ship cockpit. It was both alien and familiar, with holographic displays floating at intuitive positions and control interfaces that seemed to anticipate where my hands wanted to be. "Candidate Harper, can you hear me?" Volox's voice came through clearly, though I couldn't see him. "Loud and clear, Commander," I replied, running my hands over the controls. They felt solid, despite being simulation constructs. The Federation's neural technology was impressive. The simulated ship hummed with subtle vibrations that perfectly mimicked a real spacecraft's systems. "Your assessment begins with basic maneuvering," Volox explained. "Please proceed through the designated course at standard velocity." Through the view screen, I could see a series of glowing waypoints stretching out into what appeared to be an asteroid field. Pretty standard stuff. I'd done similar exercises in Earth simulators countless times. "Beginning assessment," I confirmed, easing the ship forward with a gentle touch on the thrust controls. The first few minutes were uneventful as I navigated from point to point, making textbook turns and maintaining perfect velocity control. I could practically feel the disappointment from the observers. "Candidate Harper is showing remarkable restraint," I heard someone mutter through the comm system they'd probably forgotten was open. "Just wait," another voice replied. "The human deviation pattern typically emerges at the 7-minute mark." I smiled to myself. 7 minutes, challenge accepted. "Candidate, please accelerate to approach velocity and prepare for the navigation challenge," Volox instructed. The asteroid field ahead was dense but not particularly threatening. Standard procedure would be to plot a conservative course through the widest gaps, maintaining safe distances from all objects. Instead, I accelerated slightly beyond the recommended speed, not enough to trigger warnings, but enough to make the observers nervous. Approaching navigation challenge, I reported professionally. Request permission to utilize proximity thrusters for fine control. There was a pause before Volox responded. Permission granted, but maintain standard safety margins. The proximity thrusters were typically used for docking procedures, not high-speed asteroid navigation, but they weren't explicitly forbidden for this scenario. I dove into the asteroid field with the precision of a surgeon, using the thrusters to execute micro-adjustments that let me slip through gaps that were technically within parameters, but definitely pushing the boundaries of standard safety margins. Candidate Harper, please be advised that your current trajectory leaves minimal error tolerance. Volox's voice had that strained quality of someone watching disaster approach in slow motion. Acknowledged, Commander. I'm well within operational parameters, I replied, threading the needle between two asteroids that passed close enough to the ship that their textures rendered in exquisite detail. 6 minutes and 30 seconds, not quite 7, but close enough. The simulation suddenly shifted, as the asteroid field gave way to an unexpected scenario, a distress call from a damaged vessel caught in a decaying orbit around a gas giant. Rescue scenario initiated, announced an automated voice. Primary objective: extract crew from disabled vessel before orbital decay reaches critical threshold. This was where most pilots would carefully calculate an intercept course, establish a stable position, and follow the Federation's 14-step rescue protocol. Time-consuming but safe. I had other ideas. Request immediate activation of emergency drive protocols, I called out, already plotting a course that would use the gas giant's upper atmosphere as a braking mechanism. That procedure is not recommended in this scenario. Volox sputtered, not prohibited either, I countered, pushing the engines to maximum as I curved toward the massive planet. Time is critical in rescue operations, and conventional approach would exceed the vessel's remaining orbital stability window by approximately 3 minutes. I heard rapid conversations in the background as I barrel-rolled the ship to optimize my entry angle into the atmosphere, a completely unnecessary maneuver from a physics standpoint, but it looked cool, and made the monitoring team collectively gasp. The human is doing it, someone hissed. Atmosphere braking maneuver, just like the fourth candidate. No, this is different, another voice responded. This one is calculating a slingshot effect combined with atmospheric resistance. They were both wrong. What I was actually doing was using the upper atmosphere to generate plasma around the ship's shields, which would ionize our hull just enough to create a temporary magnetic connection to the disabled vessel once I got close enough. The ship shuddered as we hit the outer atmosphere, warnings blaring throughout the cockpit. Hull temperature exceeding recommended parameters, the computer announced calmly. Candidate Harper, this approach is not approved, Volox said, his voice straining with professional composure. With respect, Commander, Federation Rescue Directive 5.3 authorizes emergency measures when standard protocols would result in loss of life, I replied, reciting the regulation I'd memorized specifically for situations like this. I'm implementing a modified Hohmann transfer with atmospheric braking. What I was actually doing had a name among human test pilots, the Crazy Ivan. It was less a recognized maneuver, and more a category of things you try when everything else has failed, and you're probably going to die anyway. The ship emerged from the atmosphere on a perfect intercept course with the disabled vessel, our hull glowing faintly from the heat, but well within structural limits. The simulator had accurately modeled the physics, which meant my calculations had been correct. Intercept in 15 seconds, I announced professionally, as if plunging through a gas giant's atmosphere at unsafe speeds was standard Federation procedure. I could hear the monitoring team's mixture of horror and reluctant admiration as I executed a perfect rescue maneuver, using the magnetic field I'd generated to stabilize the damaged ship without physical contact. Crew extraction complete, the computer announced. Scenario successful. Time to completion 2 minutes, 18 seconds. Previous record, 4 minutes, 53 seconds. There was a stunned silence from the observation team. Proceeding to next assessment phase, I said cheerfully. Stand by, candidate, Volox responded, his voice tight. I could hear urgent discussions in the background. I had completed the rescue scenario in record time using a technique that technically didn't violate any regulations, though it certainly violated the spirit of Federation caution, and I was just getting started. Assessment will continue, Volox finally announced. Please proceed to the combat evasion scenario. As the simulation shifted around me, I couldn't help but smile. Combat evasion. Now we were talking. The monitors had no idea what was coming next, because neither did I. And that was the secret human weapon, improvisation. The stars streaked as the scenario loaded, and I cracked my knuckles in anticipation. 7 minutes. I was just getting warmed up. The combat scenario materialized around me with impressive detail. A debris field near a contested border region. According to the briefing that flashed across my display, I was piloting a diplomatic vessel that had strayed into a sensitive area. My mission: evade hostile forces without engaging in combat or violating diplomatic protocols. Simple enough, except for the 3 enemy interceptors that immediately appeared on my sensors, moving to surround me. Candidate Harper, this is a non-combat scenario. Volox reminded me unnecessarily. Federation diplomatic protocol requires you to evade without escalation. Understood, Commander, I replied, already calculating trajectories that would make a mathematician weep. The standard approach would be to transmit peaceful intentions, maintain a predictable course away from the hostiles, and perhaps deploy diplomatic transponder codes. Effective, safe, and boring. Deploying diplomatic countermeasures, I announced instead. There's no such thing as diplomatic counter, Volox began, but stopped as I executed my plan. I targeted the largest piece of debris in the field, what appeared to be the remnants of an old space station, and fired our tractor beam at it. Not to capture it, but to use it as a pivot point. The ship swung around the debris in a tight arc that the pursuing interceptors couldn't match without executing combat maneuvers. Candidate, that use of tractor technology is not in the manual, someone muttered in the background. Actually, Federation Navigation Supplement 42B lists tractor assistance as an approved method for course correction in debris fields. I countered, having actually read the entire navigation manual. I'm simply applying it, creatively. The interceptors adjusted course, attempting to cut off my escape route. They were faster than my diplomatic vessel, but I had something they didn't: human unpredictability. I aimed directly for a particularly dense cluster of debris, pushing the engines to their limit. Collision warning, the computer announced calmly. Candidate Harper, evade immediately. Volox sounded genuinely alarmed. Trust me, I murmured, more to myself than to the observers. At the last possible second, I cut main power and activated the emergency lateral thrusters in a sequence that sent the ship into a controlled tumble. To outside observers, it would appear as though we'd suffered a catastrophic systems failure. Candidate Harper, what are you? Volox's voice cut off as I disabled all non-essential systems, including communications. The interceptors broke off their pursuit, clearly confused by my ship's apparent malfunction. Their sensors would show a powerless vessel spinning helplessly through the debris field, a diplomatic incident in the making, but no longer an active pursuit situation. I waited until they'd moved to a safe distance before bringing systems back online, using minimal power to stabilize our position behind a massive piece of debris. Systems restored, I announced, reactivating communications. Hostiles have disengaged. There was a long silence from the observation team. Playing dead is not a recognized Federation evasion tactic, someone finally said. But it worked, I pointed out, and no diplomatic protocols were violated. The ship is intact, no weapons were deployed, and we avoided confrontation. I could almost hear Volox's internal struggle. Technically, I'd completed the objective. Unconventionally, yes, but successfully. Proceeding to final assessment phase, Volox announced, his tone suggesting he'd rather be announcing my court-martial. The simulation shifted dramatically, and I found myself facing what appeared to be a spatial anomaly, a swirling vortex of energy that pulsed with colors I wasn't entirely sure existed in normal space. Navigation challenge, Delta-class spatial distortion, the computer announced. Objective, plot safe course to Starbase Gamma, while avoiding anomaly effects. Now this was interesting. Delta-class anomalies were notoriously unpredictable, bending both space and time in ways that made conventional navigation nearly impossible. The safe approach would be to give it a wide berth, even if that meant a significantly longer journey. But where's the fun in that? Requesting sensor analysis of anomaly phase harmonics, I said, bringing up the detailed scanning interface. That information is not relevant to the established safe passage protocols, Volox replied, immediately, clearly suspicious of my intentions. Just being thorough, Commander, I said innocently, while actually looking for something very specific in the sensor data. There it was, subtle fluctuations in the anomaly's energy pattern, creating what astrophysicists called temporal eddies. These micro-pockets of stable spacetime, existed even within chaotic anomalies, if you knew how to spot them. Beginning standard avoidance pattern, I announced, while simultaneously plotting a course that was anything but standard. Instead of going around the anomaly, I charted a path that would take us through its outer boundary, hopping from one temporal eddy to another like stepping stones across a river of chaos. Candidate Harper, your course will intersect with the anomaly in 60 seconds, the computer warned. Adjusting approach vector, I confirmed, making minor modifications that would perfectly align our ship with the first temporal eddy. Harper, disengage immediately, Velox ordered, finally abandoning professional detachment. You are on course for direct anomaly interaction. Negative, Commander. I've identified a stable navigation path through the perturbation field, I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. In a real ship, this maneuver would be insanely risky. In a simulator, it was a fascinating test of the physics engine. The human is attempting a temporal surfing maneuver, someone whispered in the background, sounding equal parts horrified and impressed. Impossible, another voice responded. The simulator can't model quantum temporal interactions at that resolution. Actually, I chimed in, if your physics engine accounts for Kozlowski-Chen perturbation theory, it absolutely can. The silence that followed told me I'd hit the mark. The Federation simulator was more advanced than they let on. We hit the boundary of the anomaly, and the ship shuddered as exotic energies washed over our shields. Warning indicators flashed across every console, but I ignored them, focused entirely on navigating the invisible path I'd calculated. 30 seconds to shield failure, the computer announced. Transferring auxiliary power to forward deflectors, I responded. Executing a corkscrew maneuver that aligned us with the next temporal eddy. The view screen showed impossible colors as space itself twisted around us. Behind me, I could hear what sounded like someone throwing up, which was impressive given that this was a neural simulation. 15 seconds to critical system failure, the computer continued, its calm voice at odds with the chaos unfolding around us. Hang on, I muttered, pushing the ship into a dive that didn't make any sense in three-dimensional space, but somehow worked in the twisted physics of the anomaly. And then, suddenly, we were through, emerging on the other side of the anomaly, exactly 0.3 light-years from Starbase Gamma. A journey that should have taken hours at warp speed had been compressed into minutes. Starbase Gamma within visual range, I announced, unable to keep the triumph from my voice. Time to arrival, 3 minutes, 17 seconds. The simulator fell silent, except for the hum of the ship's engines. I had completed the final challenge in a way that was either brilliant or criminally insane, depending on your perspective. Simulation complete, the computer finally announced. Please stand by for assessment. The neural interface began to disengage, the ship's controls fading from my grasp as reality reasserted itself. As the simulation sphere opened, I found myself facing not just Velox and Lyra, but an entire committee of high-ranking Federation officials, all wearing expressions that ranged from shock to outright dismay. Behind them, on a large display, was a list of what appeared to be simulator performance metrics, and next to them, a series of error messages and warnings in an alien script I couldn't read. So, I said, attempting to break the uncomfortable silence, how'd I do? The silence in the assessment chamber was profound. Federation officials exchanged glances that contained entire conversations, while technicians frantically worked at consoles displaying diagnostic information. Commander Velox stood perfectly still, his expression unreadable behind his face mask respirator. Finally, Technician Lyra approached, her silver freckles swirling in what I'd come to recognize as agitation. Candidate Harper, she began, her voice carefully neutral, your simulation performance was notable. Is that good notable or bad notable? I asked. Still feeling the residual adrenaline rush from my virtual adventure, that depends entirely on one's perspective, answered a new voice. A tall, willowy being with iridescent skin stepped forward. Based on the elaborate insignia on their uniform, this was someone of significant rank. I am Admiral Zenith, Oversight Director of Federation Flight Operations. I straightened immediately. An honor, Admiral. Is it? The Admiral's tone was dry. You've just completed our standardized pilot assessment in a manner that has triggered no fewer than 27 system exceptions, 14 physics engine resets, and what our technical team is describing as a partial quantum eigenstate collapse within the simulator matrix. To be fair, I offered, that last bit was probably due to the temporal surfing maneuver, which is theoretically sound according to absolutely no established Federation flight doctrine, Velox interrupted, finally finding his voice. Candidate Harper, you were explicitly instructed to follow standard protocols. With respect, Commander, I completed all objectives within parameters. I countered. The rescue was successful, the diplomatic incident was avoided, and we reached Starbase Gamma ahead of schedule. By navigating through a Delta-class anomaly, Velix's voice rose slightly, which I suspected was the equivalent of shouting for his species. A maneuver with a theoretical survival probability of less than 8%. In real space perhaps, I acknowledged. But in the simulator, I knew the physics engine would accurately model the temporal eddies if the programming was sophisticated enough. It was a test of the system as much as my piloting skills. Admiral Zenith made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough, and therein lies the problem, human. Our simulation system is not designed to be tested by candidates. It is designed to evaluate adherence to established procedures under standardized conditions. One of the technicians approached with a datapad, showing something to the Admiral that caused their skin to shimmer with what looked like concern. It appears, Zenith continued, that your unconventional approach has not only stressed the simulator beyond normal parameters, but has also taught it some new possibilities. Taught it? I repeated, confused. Lyra stepped in to explain. The Federation simulation system employs adaptive quantum algorithms that learn from each session. Your creative interpretations of physics have been integrated into its behavioral models. The implications dawned on me. So the next pilot who uses the simulator will be presented with scenarios that now include your improvised maneuvers as potential solutions, Velix confirmed grimly. Which means the next candidate might attempt a temporal surfing maneuver without understanding the theoretical principles behind it. Or worse, added Lyra, the simulator might spontaneously generate scenarios based on the possibility matrix you've expanded, creating challenges that no pilot should reasonably face. Admiral Zenith's skin had settled into a more formal pattern. This is not the first time we've encountered this issue with human pilots. Your predecessor convinced the simulator that intentionally triggering a warp core resonance cascade near a gravimetric distortion was a valid emergency procedure. That actually sounds interesting, I mused before catching myself. I mean highly dangerous and irresponsible, of course. Indeed, said the Admiral dryly. After the fifth human candidate required us to perform a complete systems reset and partial reprogramming of the simulator's quantum architecture, we established a special protocol for human applicants. Which is why, Velix added, humans are now only permitted one attempt at the Federation flight simulator. I blinked. So did I pass? The Federation officials exchanged another round of meaningful glances before Admiral Zenith responded. Technically, you completed all objectives. Your methods were unorthodox and in several cases explicitly contraindicated, but effective. The Admiral paused. More importantly, you demonstrated the very quality that makes human pilots simultaneously valuable and terrifying to the Federation, the ability to improvise functional solutions that no sane engineer would ever design into a system. Thank you, I ventured. It wasn't entirely a compliment, Velix muttered. Admiral Zenith's skin rippled in what might have been amusement. Nevertheless, Candidate Harper, you have qualified for provisional pilot certification with the standard human rider. What rider? Lyra handed me a datapad. On it was my certification, complete with Federation insignia, but with a prominent notation at the bottom. This pilot is authorized for emergency scenarios, first contact situations, and expeditions into uncharted space only. Under no circumstances is this pilot to be assigned to routine transport, established trade routes, or diplomatic missions requiring adherence to standard protocols. Warning: may improvise without notice. Is this normal? I asked, somewhat offended. For human pilots, completely confirmed Admiral Zenith. We've found it's the optimal deployment of your species' unique approach to spatial navigation. You'll be assigned to situations where conventional solutions have failed or don't yet exist, where we can do the least damage to established systems, Velix added, not quite under his breath. Or the most good in impossible situations, countered Lyra, her freckles forming what I was starting to recognize as a smile pattern. As the technical team began the process of resetting and recalibrating the simulator, a procedure that, judging by their expressions, would take considerable time, Admiral Zenith guided me toward the exit. Candidate Harper, or rather, Pilot Harper, there's one more thing you should know, the Admiral said quietly. While your performance today was disruptive to our systems, it was also illuminating. The Federation encounters new phenomena regularly that defy our established protocols, and that's where humans come in, I guessed. Precisely, your species' tendency to view rules as suggestions and physics as a challenge rather than a limitation is occasionally exactly what's needed. The Admiral's skin shimmered with what looked like genuine respect. "Just promise me one thing." "What's that, Admiral?" "When you inevitably attempt a real-world version of that temporal surfing maneuver, make sure your ship's data recorders are functioning. Our physicist will want to study the results, regardless of whether you survive." "That's not particularly reassuring," I noted. "Welcome to the Federation fleet, human pilot," Admiral Zenith replied, with what I was certain was the alien equivalent of a grin. "Where your species' insanity is now an officially sanctioned resource." As I left the assessment center, I caught sight of the next human candidate entering, looking nervous but determined. I couldn't help but wonder what impossible maneuver they would attempt, what new ways they would find to break the simulator. After all, with only one shot at the test, what human wouldn't try to make it legendary?